Good morning. This is the last full day of retreat. Tomorrow, late morning, early afternoon, we are finished, done, kaput. Let us continue and make best use of this precious time together. A good 24 hours left. I urge you to make best use of this precious opportunity and continue the practice right up until the end of the retreat. Tomorrow morning, in the last Dharma talk, we will go into taking the practice from here back home, so to speak. Did we ever leave? Anyway, how to take this practice and continue it in the street, at the home, in the workplace, in the difficulties, the wars of the world, and so on. But for now, the focus is on this. Don't budge. That means don't move an inch. Continue right where you are. Let us continue together to the very end. Then, out of loving compassion, even further. I mentioned Hakuin, the very important Rinzai Zen, Japanese Rinzai Zen master, Hakuin Eikaku, passed away fairly recently, just over 250 years ago. Linshi, Rinzai, and Guishan, the other master I mentioned, they lived over 1150 years ago. Almost 1,000 years difference, 900 years difference. And yet to see the same essential point is being made. Yes, it's a different era, a different time, a different culture, a different world, and yet the same basic point going back to the time of Gautama Buddha and even earlier. When we contact that truth in ourselves, not just through writings, the records, the stories, the legends, when we contact this truth, this fact directly in as ourselves, it comes to life. It comes to life. It doesn't come to life merely through the written words or the texts, as important, as valuable as they are. I have quoted a couple briefly. But we must realize it, awaken to it here, in and as ourselves. In that sense, Ursula, the umbrella will not do. Rain or sun, the umbrella will not do. One of Hakuin's greatest disciples, his name was Tore, when he was dying of illness, wrote a very, very frank kind of treatise writing, trying to outline the essentials of Rinzai Zen practice. As fate would have it, he didn't die from the illness and went on to live and became the kind of founding abbot of Ryutakuji, one of the Rinzai training monasteries, more or less at the foot of Mount Fuji. he says some rather interesting things about Rinzai practice. One of the classic statements is this. It's from section 158 in his discourse on the inexhaustible lamp. Quote, "All the old masters attained the way only by bitter suffering." Once again, all the old masters attained the way only by bitter suffering. Clear enough?
Alle alten Meister haben den Weg nur durch bitteres Leiden verwirklicht.
This is the typical Japanese Rinzai Zen jargon. Huh? Looking at the original text, it could also be rendered as something like a difficult struggle, bitter suffering, a difficult struggle. What's the point? Yes, we do have to give all of ourselves. We do have to give all of ourselves. This is true in life, certainly in spiritual practice. Any genuine spiritual practice I know of, this is required. You can't be reborn if you don't die, huh? To use spiritual terminology. Huh? We do have to give all of ourselves. But much of that suffering is unnecessary. It's not needed. Much of the suffering that we actually go through in the practice is the result of not practicing properly. The endless circles, as you well know. This is not necessary. The point of proper practice and real guidance is to eliminate, to get rid of those unnecessary vicious cycles that we may spend our lives going around and around. That is not needed. So far, so good? I'm an American, so allow me to quote from Henry David Thoreau, one of our greatest. In the opening chapter of his masterpiece called Walden, he states, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. The mass of men, all of us, lead lives of quiet desperation." Does that need to be?
Die Masse der Menschen lebt ein Leben in stiller Verzweiflung.
Again, I reckon for any genuine spiritual path, a kind of desperation is needed. Otherwise, you won't begin. You will just follow along your delusions, not satisfied, but you don't know what else to do. In a sense, only when you come to despair of the self can real spiritual practice begin, Zen or any other practice. But it needs to be a healthy despair, an honest anguish, not something borrowed from the books, pain and suffering. Oh, yes. No. That's beside the point. That's beside the point. It must be a healthy despair, an honest anguish that calls naturally from the depths of our being, not from feeling guilty about something or other or feeling unworthy or something like that. Again, this is the problem that the ego has, not the problem that the ego is. It is what calls forth, calls out, cries out from the depths of our being. You don't put that in there. You don't learn that from a book or from a teacher. You open up to it in the depths of your own being. Otherwise, it's wasted practice. This healthy despair, this honest anguish, I cannot go on leading the delusive, dishonest way I am living now. And yet I don't know, honestly, how to get out of it. I don't know how to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, as we say. Huh? The self cannot do it. And yet it must be done. Here is the entrance. This healthy despair, this honest, true anguish that comes again, naturally from the depths of the ego self. How can it not? If we open up to it, if we stop running away from it, it's there. This can give the needed impulse to realize, to fulfill the practice, not just to desire it. Everybody wants it. You think that's enough because you want to get enlightened? That will not do. Mere desire is not enough. Mere desire is the self chasing its own tail, extending, prolonging the dis-ease. It has nothing to do with genuine spiritual practice, with healthy despair, honest anguish. If it remains merely desirable, something that I want, a possibility, well then face it. It is impossible. And you have made it so. As I said before, when the impossible becomes inevitable, it cannot help but arise. You're practicing correctly. Again, but that desperation needs to be properly directed. This again is proper practice, real guidance. That desperation, that honest urge that comes from the depths of our being. Very good, but it needs to be directed properly. You know how easily it can just get wrapped up in the agenda of the self, right? It cannot be forced, nor should it be borrowed. Oh, I read about the life of Jesus or the life of Buddha or whoever. Now I have to suffer like they do. No, you have to suffer like you do. Don't add anything onto it. There is something, yes, there is something we all must go through. We're human beings with a body and a mind and a past, each our own past. Yes, we must work through that. That's right. It's not the same for you as it is for me or the person next to you. We must work through what we are, not what somebody else is or has or does. Again, this genuine practice is not something to force, nor should it be borrowed or imitated. Oh, they did it like this, so I have to do it like this. Well, it all can be helpful reference. It all can be helpful. Read the sutras, read the Zen records. It all can be helpful. But only to the extent that we breathe life into it. Practically speaking, yes, it is very important. invaluable, beyond compare, to enter samadhi, concentrated oneness in practice, and to deepen it and to sustain it, to continue it throughout the busy activities of the day. Yes. As lay people, we must be able to do this. That's why we have something a bit artificial like this. This isn't the end. This is to help us when we return tomorrow to the world, so to speak, that we can continue the fundamental practice. We don't need to sit 10, 15 hours a day every day. It's not practical. We have lives, we have work, we have family, we have friends, we have commitments. There are many other valuable things that we are doing in this world. And none of that is any less important than our spiritual practice. But if we are serious, if we see the genuine need, we will find time. And eventually you will see that you don't even need time. Whatever you're doing, however busy you get, the practice continues. It cannot be broken. By the way, yesterday was the 11th anniversary of the passing of my teacher, the guy I went through the koan practice with. It was also his birthday. And his name as a Zen master, Ko Yu Ken, refers back to a Chinese poem, which I often mention. Even deeper still, in context. Some of you know Japanese, huh? Brush up since you haven't probably been in Japan recently, huh? It's not easy to get there. I hope I can get back. Tori naite yamasara ni yu nari. Tori naite yamasara ni yu nari. The bird sings. The mountain stillness deepens. There was an earlier Chinese poem which speaks of no bird singing, icho nakazu, without one bird singing. The second line is the same. The mountain stillness deepens. But we might say with the influence of Zen, actually one of the Chinese emperors wrote this poem. By simply changing that negative, no bird sings, to a bird sings, the mountain stillness deepens. This is not just talking about nature. It is talking about nature, and yet not just nature. It's talking about us, our practice. The breeze or the wind is a common metaphor for practice or the result of practice. Huh? Kaze shizumate kara hana nao uchi. The line before it is, after the breeze stops blowing, after the wind stops blowing, a few petals fall. Hana nao uchi. The flower petals fall. You know, if you watch carefully, the wind blows, the leaves fall, the petals fall, the flower. Yes. But if you continue to watch, often a few seconds after the wind has blown, after it's stopped, some petals fall. Of themselves, you might say. Not the result of the wind. In that pregnant silence, that full silence after the wind has stopped, it falls. Well, this is spiritual practice described in terms of nature. Again, kaze shizumatte, or also kaze shizumatte kara in Japanese. This is originally Chinese. Hana now uchi. After the wind stops blowing, the breeze stops blowing, a few petals fall. Then the next line, tori naite yama sarani yunari. A bird sings, the mountain stillness deepens. This stillness, this settled silence is not mere dead like this. It's not dead. It's alive. It's alive beyond birth and death. And so when a bird sings, if it breaks the silence, well, it's not true silence, is it? It's not true stillness, is it? It's a stillness, a silence that perhaps is an escape from the noise of the world. Oh, motorcycles, no. Birds, yes. Motorcycles, no. That's not silence. That's the noisy mind, the discriminating, discursive mind. You'll never come to silence that way. But when you realize when the bird sings, or when the motorcycle roars by, the mountain stillness deepens. It cannot be broken. True stillness, true silence cannot be broken. Come to that and your Zen practice is on its way. Just a word for my koan teacher who passed away 11 years and 1 day ago. I trust you see how it's all connected. To deepen and to sustain this samadhi, not just to hold it as some kind of a, as Eckhart said, a place in my soul where then maybe God or the bird, not the motorcycle, can enter. No, that is not poverty. That is not true stillness. That is not genuine silence. It cannot be broken. To deepen and to sustain patiently and humbly this samadhi, concentrated oneness. Then, as Hakuin and so many others make clear, to finish dying and then come back fully to life, ready for a lifetime of maturing practice. Otherwise, perfect Zazen posture, so-called Kensho experiences and so on, frankly, they do more harm than good. They're better not to seek after. They do more harm than good. You do have what you need. Have you realized it? What is my role here? As a guide, my role is finally to become completely unnecessary, utterly redundant. Then our work is truly done. This teacher-student, teacher-disciple relationship is intimate and extremely valuable. I went through it myself well over 25 years. I had the good fortune to be introduced to a relatively young Zen master, so I was able to go through the whole practice with him. By the time I finished, he was pretty ill from Parkinson's illness, Parkinson's disease. But I was very fortunate to be able to truly go through the practice with him. This teacher-student, teacher-disciple, this relationship is invaluable. It is so precious that, as Wolfgang and I touched on yesterday, it is so valuable that that very relationship, teacher, student, must fall away from both sides. Then it's genuine. Then we can truly serve each other and all others. Then, in a profound sense, everything becomes our guide, our teacher. We can learn from each and every one, each and everything. You see, this humility I keep coming back to is not something, remember to be humble. No, it comes from out of the depth of that experience. There's no place for anything but humility. How could it not arise if arrogance, pride, hubris, spiritual pride arises? Something is very wrong. Again, reading these Zen texts can be helpful. For example, Hakuin Eikaku, who I mentioned, Hakuin, he speaks with painful frankness and honesty about his own experiences when he was young. He speaks of shouldering his glorious enlightenment, something that probably no one had had for a couple of 100 years. And eventually, of course, he got smacked around a bit, and he talks about that very frankly too. But this kind of pride, arrogance, if we're not careful, it can arise. You may feel you've struggled so long and so hard, and then when the door opens, when the light shines, oh my goodness, it may only be what we say the size of a firefly, a little, the summer fireflies, they have a light, very nice. It may be the size of a firefly, but we've never seen it before, so we think, the sun has risen! Just a little button. But what do we know? Compared to what? So we take this little firefly Kensho experience. That's it, I've got it! You lost it. This is where a genuine connection with, more broadly, Dharma friends, people practicing on the way together. Of course, especially a teacher or a guide, someone who has really gone all the way through. But practicing together, I trust you have seen how precious this is as well. It's largely, Tina, that's why you come. 1/3 of the way around the world. I came halfway around the world. You only came 1/3, right? You came from the States, I think I came farther than you. But anyway, you came a great distance at a very difficult time. You didn't come to play, huh?
I did not.
So this kind of a sangha is so precious. is so precious. Each one of us doing what we do, being here and practicing with and for each other. It's so valuable. Of course, the guidance of a teacher is very, very precious indeed. But as I said, unless that relationship eventually falls away of its own accord, it hasn't fulfilled itself yet. It's not yet. It's still a problematic, a troubled relationship. It's not yet a real Zen meeting of minds. Again, Wolfgang, you may want to give your own interpretation. Insight equaling the teacher cuts it in half. Only surpassing, going beyond that, only surpassing insight is worthy here. Here, in the sense of to carry on this transmission, the Zen lineage, so to speak. As I said, these are words, actually it's kind of a set statement, but Guishan, the master I kept mentioning yesterday, mentions this in the record of Rinzai, commenting on Rinzai. It's not saying you've got to be better than your teacher. You've got to go beyond being better or worse. You follow? Don't misunderstand it. It's not arrogance or hubris, the spiritual pride, let alone a kind of false humility. Well, I'm not really worthy, but I will take the stick anyway. Give it to me. Rather, that statement, Wolfgang, you see, insight equaling the teacher cuts it in half. Only surpassing insight is worthy here. This is what is required of a worthy student or disciple and a worthy teacher. Again, this is not something added on. It comes naturally from out of the genuine Zen experience, if we speak of it that way. How can there be something to hold on to? If there is, you ain't there yet. You're not there yet. There's nothing to hold on to. There's not even anything to let go. Those delusions themselves are the muddy water that the lotus grows out of. No, that's not an excuse to continue in your delusions. True, genuine humility, as I said, that is being without self. Being without self is thoroughgoing humility, not even being one thing, not even being humble. Then, as I said, not something added on, but quite naturally, inevitably, it can't be helped. Everything can serve as a guide, as a teacher then. We can learn from each and every one. Each and everything. Far from being a hindrance, an obstruction, something that prevents us from practicing. The pain in the knee, the cough in the throat, becomes itself a precious teacher on the way, as does illness. Everything can serve as a guide, can guide us back home. Here, underfoot. Please keep your eye open, your eye that is your heart, that is the whole universe, open wide. Let us continue this wonderful, marvelous practice together. There's still a few minutes if anyone would like to ask a question or concern, something that's not clear from out of the practice. Please feel free. Werner.
Yesterday you talked about the discursive mind, wandering mind, which ends after awakening. And today you spoke about stillness that never ends. But what about our thinking and thoughts in daily life? For example, if you are in a creative process, you let wandering your mind just wait what happens and then take the glimpse which is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a discursive thinking?
It's important to see that what is being addressed is the delusion or the delusions hidden in the lotus threads. The delusions of thought and feeling, thinking and emotion. Not the thoughts. There's nothing wrong with the thoughts. We're human beings. We have to think. The creative process is not free of thinking. We have to think in our daily affairs. I have to plan what time it is to get to the train station to get back to where I'm going. I have to plan when I go to the airport, check-in luggage or carry-on luggage. That's a big one. You mess that one up, you're in trouble. You follow?
Yeah.
You have to think. You know, this nonsense of people who don't know any better will say, oh, Zen, no thinking, stop thinking, then that's Zen. It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. Thinking, admittedly, is more or less the surface. It's the surface, but it has a very important role, and it can go very deep. The point is, from where does this thinking come? In the creative process, often the ego self is at least temporarily gone. That's how we can create. You can't create just sitting there as yourself, can you?
Yeah.
You have to, in a sense, give yourself to, we call the creative process, right? You have to. So, please don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, now I have to stop thinking or stop feeling. No. You have to truly think from here and truly feel from here. I would go so far as to say, only then is the feeling and the emotion really genuine or true. And you all know this intuitively. You all already know it. You know what it is to fall in love. And in a sense, falling in love is the boundaries becoming undone. The other is not an other anymore, right? If you're in love. You literally lose yourself and find yourself in the other. This is love. Does anyone not know what I'm talking about? Okay. But you also know, don't you, what so-called love, it's a very vague word, can do when it gets tangled up with the ego self, right? I love you, now you're mine. You cannot be with another person. Possessiveness, jealousy, right? Where does that come from? Where does that come from? Is that love? No, that's the death of love, isn't it? And we all know this, don't we? Unfortunately, often from our own experience. Well, it's clear, isn't it, Werner? It's no mystery. It's no mystery. You know what true love is. It's the most marvelous human experience there is. That division that we have created disappears. How? It just disappears when you encounter that person. And what can the mind then do with it? We know the hell that can come. So please consider well, thinking has its place. Thinking has its place. Feelings have their place. I would say, again, the emotion is only genuine when it is without self. Without self doesn't mean without feeling, like a zombie. It means the feeling is full and pure, undefiled. To go back to Bernhard's first question. Yes, truly undefiled. That doesn't mean dead. No, it means really alive. A few months ago, my oldest brother suddenly died. And nowadays, when I listen to some of the music that we shared, I'm a Woodstock boy. I actually met my brother at Woodstock. We were not close because my parents divorced. I lived with my mother. He lived with my father. He went over to the dark side. So we didn't know each other. Oh, we both went to Woodstock without knowing each other. And David, what are you doing here? Jeff, what are you, 15 years old? What are you doing here? But after that, as you can imagine, we became very close. And we shared a lot of that music. So now, he's gone. I listen to that music and I can just cry. Just cry. Cry for the loss of my dear brother David. And it may sound strange, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way to honor, to pay tribute to him. You understand? So, I'm enlightened, so I don't feel sadness. No, I'm enlightened. Well, I wouldn't even go that far, but I know what it is to feel sadness all the way to the bottom and not try to cover it over. You see what happens with the ego, right? Oh, I'm so sad. But wait a minute, I've been practicing Zen for 7 years now. I shouldn't feel sad. I'm not sad. Hello? So please don't make that mistake. We don't have to get rid of anything except the delusion that we put up between us. That's all. Then the feeling comes. Of course, the joy is beyond imagination. The joy of being without self is the joy of the ego self grasping one thing or letting go of another. It's not joy at all. It's half pain and suffering, isn't it? What happens if I can't keep it? What happens if they leave? The joy of being without self is beyond measure, beyond compare. And so is the sadness. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Does that respond to your question?
Yes, of course.
Well, you were asking about in daily life. Yeah. In daily life, we have to make compromises. We have to do things that we may feel uncomfortable with, right? That's right. There's the real practice, isn't it? Huh? If it's alive, how do you respond there? First of all, you don't need to have some idealized image over your head, right? Right? No. If you make a mistake, correct it. If you feel uncomfortable, maybe you can speak up about it. Say so. You can, again, what your brilliant Protestant theologian Paul Tillich spoke of, agree to disagree. I wish most Americans could speak with the eloquence that Paul Tillich did. He wasn't even a native speaker. To agree to disagree. You understand? I don't agree with you, but that's fine. That's fine. One of our American forefathers, there's a lot of things to be proud of as an American. and a lot of things to be ashamed of. But one thing that I grew up being very proud of was one of our forefathers said. He was what we now call a politician. Oh God, we could use some of these now. Well, this politician 200 years ago said, I completely disagree with what you have just said. I completely disagree with what you have just said. But I will defend with my life, if necessary, the right for you to say it. Can you understand that? Mm. Well, that's American Zen. And we could use a little more of it now. You understand?
Yeah.
Once again, this is what is called freedom of speech in America. True freedom of speech. Not, I have something to say, but I completely disagree with what you have just said. Understood? But I will defend with my life, if necessary, okay, the right for you to say it. And the need, I will have, the need for me to listen with love. Again, Paul Tillich. To listen with love. That's how he described, well, Zen without knowing it. To listen with love. I don't know if that helps, but being a sentimental American, it helps me. Do you want to say anything else, Barbara?
No.
It's almost time. Again, we have one more Dharma talk tomorrow, trying to kind of transition, so to speak, from here back to the world. Let us please continue together. We have a little more than 24 hours. This precious opportunity together. Thank you again for your questions and for all of you listening with love so intently.